Hello everybody, I'm doing another video giving my further thoughts on Denis Noble and the third way of evolution. This is a follow-up to my other video explaining how Subboor, Ahmad and Qaiser were lost on Denis Noble and the recent debate between Farina and Subboor. One area of contention that was brought up was whether Denis Noble was an evolutionary biologist.
Noble is an Oxford professor, which is something prestigious, something that Farina can never be. Maybe that's why he's attacked.
He's not an evolutionary biologist, though.
He is an evolutionary biologist.
No,
as well.
he isn't.
He's
you can Google it. You can Google it. It's kind of shocking that you didn't know that, actually.
Search engines may say that Denis Noble is an evolutionary biologist because he has spoken about it and contributed to discussions on evolutionary biology. Zach Hancock explains here why Noble is not an evolutionary biologist.
And I'm going to try to tell you why I don't think Denis Noble is an evolutionary biologist. Right here for us, he's an Oxford professor. He's a fellow of the Royal Society. Look at this Noble model from 1962, and he claims that this is his earliest evolutionary contribution. So let's kind of pull the veil back on all of this and explain why Denis Noble is unequivocally not an evolutionary biologist. I think to be an evolutionary biologist, and I want to be clear here, it's not like you get a badge that says you are now an evolutionary biologist. Congratulations. In effect, to be an evolutionary biologist, I think that you have to do one of three things. You either have to have done some sort of work in the lab around evolutionary biology. So this is like you do experimental evolution, you do population genetics, you do phylogenetics, you do systematics, you do evolutionary ecology or behavioral ecology, right? Like there's some things that you research that are broadly considered within the realms of evolutionary biology. That's point number one. Denis Noble does none of those things. None of his research could fall under any of those categories. So that's one issue. The second thing is that you publish in journals that specialize in evolution. And so what we mean by that is journals like Evolution, published by the Society for the Study of Evolution. You publish in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology, in Genetics, in Molecular Biology and Evolution. There's a series of journals that evolutionary biologists publish in. Now, Denis Noble has a very long Google Scholar. But you can go through, and I've tried to make sure I went through every single one before I made this claim. He has not published a single paper in any journal that could ever be considered a journal on evolution. Not a single one. So all of his papers are in like physiology journals, or they're in journals like Progress in Molecular Biology and Biophysics, in which is a crank journal, for one. They published that like cephalopods come from outer space. And two, that he was the chief editor of when he did most of the publishing, right? So like that's point number two, why he's not an evolutionary biologist. And then the last one is that every year, all evolution societies all around the world have conferences. And if you're an evolutionary biologist, you go to these conferences, you present your work to the community, and you get critiqued of your work by the community. I have been to many of these. Never seen Denis Noble there at any of them. Never seen James Shapiro at any of them. Never seen any of these third way dudes ever go to an evolution conference. What do? They host their own little special conferences, right? That aren't actually affiliated with any society. They just do their own little thing so that they know that like the evolutionary biologists aren't going to show up and crash. And so it's like in all three, like all he would needed to do was do one of those. If he could have just done one of those things, I would know, okay, he's an evolutionary biologist. He didn't do one of those three things. So to me, that is unequivocal. He's not an evolutionary biologist.
Denis Noble has appeared on multiple channels promoting his ideas on evolution, many with misleading and clickbait titles such as The End of Neo-Darwinism, Evolution May Be Purposeful and It's Freaking Scientists Out, and Evolution's Foundations Are Crumbling. I want to focus on this particular discussion that you had on the Chasing Reality channel back in 2019, where he tended to use more clearer language than in his other appearances. He mentions, as he does in his other appearances, the rationale behind the creation of the third way of evolution group and their four main critiques. Zach Hancock's video here, which is linked in the description, goes into much more detail about why Denis Noble is wrong about evolution, but I will make some points here.
August Weismann, a great German geneticist, well, I describe him as a geneticist. Actually, of course, genetics, and certainly not DNA, was not known in the way that we know it today.
Sure.
But he was concerned with inheritance. And August Weismann took Darwin's ideas, and he was shocked by parts of Darwin's book, The Origin of Species. His shock was that Darwin, in about 12 places in The Origin of Species, accepts Lamarck's ideas on the inheritance of acquired characteristics.
This is Noble's first attack that he mentions frequently, his attempt to resurrect some form of Lamarckian inheritance by attacking the Weismann barrier. He brings up Darwin's theory of pangenesis, where the parts of the body emit particles called gemmules, which migrate to the gonads and are transferred to offspring. It is important to remember that Darwin did not know about genetics, and that the incorporation of Mendelian inheritance through genetics with Darwinism led to the creation of Neo-Darwinism, or the modern synthesis.
August Weismann was of the view that there is no way in which the body, the soma, could influence the germline. That idea is what we now call Weismann's barrier. Now, it's often thought that Darwin must have agreed with that. He certainly did not, because not only in The Origin of Species does he refer in 12 places to accepting Lamarck's idea, he also developed a theory for how it could happen. It's in one of the later books, The Domestication of Animals and Plants. And what he said was, I think there must be tiny particles that go through the fluids of the body and can influence the germline. He called them gemmules. His gemmules are what we now call exosomes. We know that exosomes go straight down to the germline.
To Noble, these exosomes are a way in which there is some form of Lamarckian inheritance. He published this paper, notably in the Journal of Physiology and not an evolutionary biology journal, the summary of which was that exosomes challenge the Weismann barrier. There is some mention that Noble was a consulting editor in the Journal of Physiology. I looked to see whether there were any other papers that agreed with this. There are these two papers that are recently published that are reviews of exosomes. They are both linked in the description. They describe their function, but neither of them suggest any inheritance of exosomes, so it appears that exosomes are not the gemmules that Darwin had envisaged, and that Denis Noble is wrong to use them in an attempt to resurrect some form of Lamarckian inheritance.
The reason why we formed the Third Way of Evolution website, as a group, we found it very strange to be faced with this situation in which it's been known for a long time that the simple assumptions of Neo-Darwinism, or what's called the modern synthesis, cannot be sufficient on their own, yet you don't find this taught in schools. You don't find it in the textbooks.
He then brings up the often repeated creationist claims that controversies within evolutionary biology are withheld from the public, and so that is why he needed to form the Third Way of Evolution group.
That there's a very substantial group of us who wish to see research on evolutionary biology open up.
Well, as we explained earlier in this video, Denis Noble is not an evolutionary biologist, and he is repeating creationist claims.
Collaborate with a lot of United States people. The debate over evolution over there is hotly contested. It's contested, of course, by very strongly fundamentalist Christians. Mm-hmm. And I know Middle America as well as the East and West Coast. And you'll be surprised the extent to which, just talking with ordinary people in relation to this question of whether they think we have or have not evolved from other animals, there are very large numbers who think that cannot possibly be true. Now, I think that puts the evolutionary biologists in the United States in a very particular social situation, which we need to understand.
Yes.
Which is that many of them have also used evolutionary biology to attack religion. Now, it's not a surprise, therefore, that when I organized a meeting on new trends in evolutionary biology at the top Academy of Science here in the United Kingdom, that is the Royal Society and the British Academy, in 2016, I received the information that evolutionary biologists in the United Kingdom were worried about this meeting because they had received messages from colleagues in the United States saying this is a disaster. The dogmatism here is that the Neo-Darwinist synthesis must be protected, must be regarded as absolute, because we've told the religious right in the United States that it is absolute and absolutely certain.
So, according to Denis Noble, oops, I sound a bit like Subboor there. So, according to Denis Noble, evolutionary biologists refuse to open up Neo-Darwinism to further study because they have supposedly told the religious right that Neo-Darwinism is absolutely certain. This is, of course, absolute rubbish, as any evolutionary biologist would say, and this is the type of rhetoric that supports the idea that Denis Noble is paid by the Templeton Foundation to use his scientific credentials to undermine Neo-Darwinism. I want to mention this much more recent appearance by Denis Noble, here from 2024. Here he repeats how organisms have agency and purpose and that organisms can control or change their genome. The host naturally follows on from this and asks if this can be a form of dualism.
You can't understand the movements of individual molecules in a system without understanding the constraints produced by the whole system, which means the structure of the system.
So, Professor, if we're going to say, hey, we're not rejecting reductionism entirely, it's a valuable tool, we understand biological mechanisms.
Not at all. You need reductionism as well.
If we're going to say that, and
Yes.
then at the same time we need a holistic perspective to understand how those mechanisms interact and give rise to emergent properties, etc., then is that a dualistic view where the wholes and the parts exist as separate entities?
Not sure that I fully get the question there. Can you put that
Sure.
again?
So if you have a separate set of laws for the whole and the parts, do you see that as a form of dualism?
Ah, okay. Ah, right, a form of dualism. Yes, I like that question very much. I could go on for ages about dualism, but I would try and be brief. In one sense, yes, because what we're saying is reductionism alone is not enough to describe a system that is functional. You need the constraints which form the boundary conditions for the behavior of the molecular components. That much is very obvious. I don't know whether one really wants to call that dualism.
It's quite telling, his pause here when asked about dualism. He can't come up with an openly religious statement such as depositing the existence of a soul because it is scientifically unsound how that could be the case. Instead, what Denis Noble is trying to do is to make scientific-sounding statements that can be interpreted by creationists to promote their views and also to attack Neo-Darwinism and evolution. We can see here how Evolution News, which is published by the Discovery Institute, has picked up on Denis Noble's writings and interpreted it by saying how it suggests a naturalistic origin of life is impossible, and that purpose and desire in living systems, which Denis Noble describes, can only realistically come from a creator or intelligent designer. Ultimately, that is what I think the third way of evolution is about. The modern synthesis already incorporates mechanisms that were not known to Darwin. It is a robust science that is willing to incorporate new scientific findings and has not been held by dogma. Whereas intelligent design is just repackaged creationism in the hope of sneaking creationism into school education, the third way of evolution is similar. Intelligent design doesn't explicitly say that a god created living organisms, but it just makes suggestions that living organisms could only have been intelligently designed and then people are encouraged to wonder, what could that intelligent designer be? The third way of evolution and talk of purpose and desire and agency in living systems is supposed to make people doubt that evolution occurs by accident and that there is a kind of agency and purposiveness in driving their own evolution. People are then supposed to wonder, what created that guiding agency and purposiveness of evolution? Thank you for watching, and please let me know what you think in the comments section.